Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 23 of Quattroporte, the review series for the four-door sports saloons and super saloons of Gran Turismo. And in this episode we're featuring the Honda Accord Euro R model, and this is the 2002 spec machine. There are two particular Accord Euro Rs, there's the year 2000 shape and this one the 2002. And they're not just a facelifted model compared to a non-facelift. They are actually genuinely different vehicles. They have completely different engines, completely different specs, a different price, and completely different looks and physical sizes and abilities. Now, of the two, to be completely honest, straight off the bat, this is on paper the inferior model of the two. The year 2000 shape, which does look significantly more dated, despite only being 2 years older on the game, is a superior car on paper. This model has a 2-litre turbocharged VTEC engine, whereas the older model has a 2.2. This car has less torque, less power, weighs more, is a lower PP, and doesn't have as much horsepower per tonne. So as I said, in every way this car is inferior on paper. So what's the point of reviewing it? If it's inferior, why not just feature the what would obviously be better version? Well, because this car is very good in its own right. And if they were essentially the same model and this one was inferior, then I would make an argument for only including the better model. But they're not the same car. They are completely different. And the only commonality that the two cars share are that they are Honda Accords. Apart from that, they are completely unique machines compared to each other. The older shape Accord is a longer, lower and narrower vehicle overall, a typical Japanese shaped sedan, whereas this Accord is a much more European styled sedan. It has that typical European, British to some extent look to it, the kind of cars which you see a lot on the British market, cars like the smaller Audis, the smaller Beamers. And they're not just marketed in Britain, of course, but those are the type of cars that I see every day, and this is one of the best-selling models of that range. So, although they share the same name, that's about it. This model is a 2-litre, as I said, and that 2-litre engine produces 411 horsepower. Not that much torque, which isn't surprising for a, in effect, Type R model. They don't tend to go for torque, it tends to be high revving power, kind of like a motorbike to some degree. This one puts out 242 pound-feet, and it weighs in at 1143 kilos, which means it's around, just under 60 kilos heavier than the older model. It's still pretty light though, even though being the heavier of the two. It puts out 360 horsepower per tonne, which is okay. It's not bad at all for the power. That's around what you'd expect from a decent hot hatch, for instance. And the PP, when fully tuned, sits at dead on 500 PP. Which is nice. I like it when cars do that, because it means it's very easy to tune them to a certain level, because they naturally sit there. However, that is 16 pp lower than the older model, and that's a big difference. So is this car really competitive enough to be worth buying? Well, speaking of buying, first of all, there's the price. This car is cheaper than the older model. Not by much, it's only 30 credits difference. But both cars are only 25 grand. So I would say they're very well priced as far as sports saloons go. But for this car in particular, I would say the main advantages of this car, specifically when compared to the older model, are its size. And that's perhaps not an obvious trait to have to its advantage. See, the older model is a far quicker car in a straight line, there's no doubt about that. This car, though, as I already mentioned, is shorter and dumpier overall in its appearance. Now, it's not a dumpy car. It just looks dumpy because of how long and narrow the older model is in comparison. And that is good. in some ways, because in terms of handling, those proportions make the car much more grounded in terms of its width. For instance, it's a very squat car compared to the older model, which is taller in relation to its width. And this car is a lot shorter, and that's the biggest difference between the two. The biggest difference in terms of handling, that is. A longer car will always have more trouble manoeuvring through corners than a shorter car, and this is the shorter car of the two. So, is it better? Well, I can't really say that it is, because quite clearly the older model is the superior model of the two. But I actually personally prefer this model overall, because although the older model is, strictly speaking, better, I prefer the look of this car. I prefer the fact that it has a more traditional 2-litre Honda engine compared to the 2.2, makes it closer to stuff like the Civic and what you'd expect from vehicles like that, which is probably the most iconic Type R from Honda. And overall, to be fair, it's kind of like a JGTC car in that, like with the JGTC models, many of them it's just down to which one you personally prefer because they're so similar. And I would say that's actually the case between the two Accords. One is, for sure, slightly better, but this car's still highly capable as a sports saloon. So, if you're looking for a decent sports saloon, particularly a front-wheel drive one, this is one of the best that you can get for that category, and it's reasonably priced as well. So, that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.